Nashville.
This is the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite.
Good evening. With the Senate chopping his energy plan into pieces, President Carter went over the head of Congress today and took the fight to save it to the people. The president made an unscheduled late afternoon appearance before White House reporters, Ed Bradley among them.
His speech was brief, and so was his message. At a meeting of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, President Carter said it is critical that Congress enact a strong energy package. Later at the White House, the president sharpened his message, praising the House for resisting oil industry pressure and calling on the Senate to do the same. Mr. Carter said deregulation of natural gas would cost consumers $10 billion by 1985. And he said there comes a time when we must ask, how much is enough?
Our proposed price under this plan would give producers strong incentives to explore and to develop new supplies of natural gas through a price which will be 6 times higher than the price was 5 years ago. That is enough. It's time for the public interest to prevail over special interest lobbyists. And I call on the Senate to act responsibly in the interest of the great majority of Americans to reject narrow special interest attacks on all segments of the National Energy Plan.
The president was careful to praise Senate Majority Leader Robert Byrd and to express confidence in the Senate's final decision. But this message was also a warning that he will go over their heads to the public in an effort to defeat what he called the narrow special interests of the oil industry. Ed Bradley, CBS News, the White House.
The Senate's floor fight over natural gas price controls triggered Mr. Carter's decision to go public for his energy plan, but gas prices are only part of the problem the bill has run into. More from Nelson Benton.
Energy legislation passed by the House was not exactly the moral equivalent of war that the president called for last April, but it was much closer to what he asked than what the Senate is doing to his energy plan. The newest setback was today's rejection of the Carter crude oil tax by the Senate Finance Committee. That tax could be revived with more of its revenue going to increased energy production, less to consumers in rebates. The rest of the scorecard so far, a proposed increase in gasoline taxes to discourage consumption, killed by the House, not even discussed in the Senate. The gas guzzler tax on inefficient new cars, approved after modifications in the House, rejected by the Senate Finance Committee. The full Senate, however, voted a ban on building 1980 model cars that get less than 16 miles per gallon, with the standard increasing each year. The standards in that bill are lower, though, than those set in the gas guzzler tax. The House approved measures to force industrial conversion to coal. The Senate weakened that somewhat. It has not acted on tax measures to make oil and natural gas consumption unattractive to industry. The House voted to continue federal regulation of natural gas prices. The Senate is still tied in knots over that issue, but appears likely to approve higher prices than those proposed by the president, even under continued regulation. The House approved the Carter plan to spread more evenly consumer and industrial costs for electricity. That plan was rejected in the Senate Energy Committee. Mr. Carter's plan to give tax credits for improved home insulation and for the addition of solar heating and cooling equipment is still intact, approved by the House and the Senate Finance Committee. Delaware Republican William Roth has been a consistent critic on the Finance Committee.
Well, I think the real problem with this president's proposal is that it's not an energy program. It's a tax increase. And I think that's what's got people uptight.
We are making some selective changes, but the fundamental thrust of the president's program is there and will be there when it goes to the president for signature.
The nation's first energy secretary and architect of the energy plan is not dismayed.
At this stage, we have not made as much progress as we would like, but the demise of the National Energy Plan has been predicted before. Indeed, it has been reported before, but it has not yet occurred. I do not expect it to occur.
House Majority Leader Jim Wright was asked about the possibility of Congress agreeing on the moral equivalent of war in energy policy. Wright thought for a moment and replied, Cold War, perhaps. Nelson Benton, CBS News, Washington.
The Senate voted 77 to 17 today to shut off a filibuster and limit debate on gas price controls, but a vote on the controls themselves is not expected until later in the week. The nation's growing imports of foreign oil have been blamed for this year's mounting deficit in the balance of trade, but last month oil imports declined, and still the deficit swelled by a near record $2.7 billion. The culprit this time was a sharp drop in American exports.
Do you have anything for headaches?
Yes, take 2 of these.
Arthritis pain formula? I have a headache, not arthritis.
Doesn't matter. Arthritis pain formula is great for occasional headaches, too. Look at the label.
Also relieves headaches. Must be strong.
You bet it is. APF has more pain reliever in it than most headache tablets. Arthritis pain formula.
Hey, thanks. Arthritis pain formula is great for headaches.
Arthritis pain formula. Great for headaches, too.
The next time you buy coffee, how'd you like to get an extra half-pound free? That's what it's like using Mr. Coffee. That's right. When you use America's #1 coffee maker with its coffee saver, you get great tasting coffee fast. And with Mr. Coffee, you use up to 50% less coffee than with electric percolators. Result, using Mr. Coffee is like getting an extra half-pound free. What a delicious way to save.
Fighting in southern Lebanon, which escalated in the past week with active Israeli intervention, died down today as a shaky ceasefire between right-wing Christians and leftist Palestinians took hold. Here's Bob Simon with the report that cleared Israeli censorship.
There was little joy at the border this morning as Israeli armor began thundering back from Lebanon into Israel. Israeli officers and their Christian comrades in arms were skeptical that the ceasefire would hold, afraid that the Christians would now be overwhelmed by Palestinians, resentful of the United States for engineering a ceasefire which leaves Christian and Israeli towns more vulnerable to Palestinian attacks. These are the tanks and armored personnel carriers which Israel never admitted had been operating in Lebanon. It appears now that they did not have a very active combat role, that their mission was to protect the women and children in Christian villages while their men were fighting the Palestinians. The terms of the ceasefire, agreed to by Israel, Syria, and the Lebanese government, stipulate that Palestinian forces will withdraw at least 6 miles from the Israeli border, that the Lebanese army will take control of the zone, that the good fence policy allowing Lebanese to move in and out of Israel will continue, that the Israeli forces will withdraw. There was an emotional farewell between an Israeli officer and the commander of the Lebanese Christians, Major Haddad.
I salute to you, to the Lebanese army.
Thanks for you. Thanks for your help.
Thank you.
But while this was happening, minutes before the ceasefire was to go into effect, Soviet-made Katyusha rockets slammed into Kiryat Shmona and Sfat, Israeli towns near the border. It was the 3rd rocket attack in Kiryat Shmona in 4 days. This one was the worst. 7 people were injured. This may have been the last Palestinian salvo before a ceasefire. It may have been a signal from Lebanon that the Palestinians may make peace with the Christians, but never with the Israelis. By pulling out its forces today, Israel is making a political gesture with very little military significance. The tanks, the armored personnel carriers will be here at the border, ready to return at the first sound of Palestinian guns. Bob Simon, CBS News, at the Good Fence.
Over the weekend, the State Department applauded Israel's acceptance of a U.S. proposal for a pan-Arab delegation, including Palestinians, at a Geneva peace conference. But today at the UN, Secretary of State Vance said that unspecified Israeli conditions, presumably refusal to deal with the PLO, in Vance's words, do not accurately reflect our views.
This is a baby, and this is a baby. They both have special nutritional needs. That's why there's baby food for babies, and why now there's a baby food for puppies. Presenting Gaines Puppy Choice. It's fortified with all the calcium, vitamins, and protein a puppy needs. It's moist and meaty, yet it isn't too rich, and it's easy to digest. Gaines Puppy Choice. Think of it as baby food for puppies.
When I grow up, I'm going to have a big house with all my dolls.
When I get big, I'm going to own my own business and pay my men with ice cream.
I'm going to own a car, a boat.
Whatever your dreams are, someday you'll need insurance. At Continental Insurance, we can insure you, your home, your car, your business, and all your other dreams that come true.
And I'm going to see the whole world as soon as I'm allowed to cross the street.
The Carter administration went on the offensive today as it took its campaign for ratification of the Panama Canal treaties to Congress. Secretary of State Vance appeared before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Defense Secretary Harold Brown and General George Brown, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, went before the House International Relations Committee. All of them, in their respective testimonies, defended the treaties as being in the best interests of the United States. There was another development today and a potential scandal that has touched the long, just completed negotiations, and Phil Jones has that story.
CBS News has learned that a Senate subcommittee this afternoon voted unanimously to subpoena a former U.S. Army sergeant to determine whether he was involved in any way with the alleged sale of U.S. intelligence information to Panamanian authorities for more than $10,000. The subpoena is for Sergeant Hor Rodriguez Brustmeyer, now out of the Army. The subpoena orders Brustmeyer to appear before the Senate subcommittee on separation of powers on September 30th. Also subpoenaed are representatives from the Defense Department, from Justice, and the directors of the FBI and CIA in an effort to secure any records that might pertain to the sergeant or the alleged incident that reportedly occurred back in late 1974 or early 75. Senator James Allen, chairman of the subcommittee, which incidentally is loaded with senators opposed to the Panama Canal treaties, says he understands that the former sergeant can supply important information. The Senate Intelligence Committee claims that no U.S. intelligence activities affected the treaty talks, but officials have refused to say whether spying actually occurred, whether Panamanians ever did anything that could have been interpreted as blackmail, and whether, as alleged, an American military man sold intelligence information to the Panamanians. Former Sergeant Brustmeyer is 28 years old. He served in the Canal Zone and was mustered out of the Army this past August with an honorable discharge. Brustmeyer has been living in Brooklyn, New York, but he is believed to have gone to Panama last week. Traveling in London tonight, Panamanian leader Omar Torrijos told CBS News that he has never heard of Brustmeyer, that to his knowledge the U.S. never spied on Panama, and that Panamanians at no time threatened the U.S. Phil Jones, CBS News, Washington.
Control of the currency, John Hyman's criticism of Bert Lance's banking practices was a factor leading to the resignation of the Carter administration budget director. Today at a Senate Banking Committee hearing, Hyman was asked whether he would hire Lance as a banker.
Well, it would depend on the job that I needed to have done in my institution.
Quite a statement, Mr. Hyman.
Came out a little bit more humorously than I intended, actually. The management of his institution was charged with unsafe and unsound practice, and that was corrected. They made a mistake, and it was corrected. The question is, if I were the controlling shareholder of a bank and had the right to hire management, would I consider hiring Mr. Lance? And the answer is yes, I certainly would.
Incidentally, Lance and his wife were in Washington today for a farewell reception for White House and Budget Office employees. President and Mrs. Carter stopped by. The staff gave Lance his official chair with brass nameplate on the back from the cabinet room. Lance said it reminded him of a tombstone back in Georgia bearing the epitaph, "I told you I was sick."
Jenner's going to do it. He's won the gold, but he's going after the record, and he's going to shatter it. Jenner's got it. Jenner's won the Olympic decathlon. What a day for Bruce Jenner.
I logged a lot of miles getting ready for that day, and downed a lot of Wheaties. In fact, Wheaties has been on my breakfast table since I was a kid, because a complete breakfast with Wheaties is good for you, and good tasting, too.
Take it from Bruce Jenner. Wheaties is the breakfast of champions.
Lytton announces the biggest cooking breakthrough since microwave, the Lytton Meal-in-One Microwave Oven. Its secret is a unique cooking system that lets you cook a complete meal. 1, 2, 3 foods, all at the same time. And it has a solid-state memory so you can just touch and cook. The new Lytton Meal-in-One Microwave Oven. Taste a demonstration at your Lytton dealer beginning October 1st. See how Lytton is changing the way America cooks.
The lowest reserve seat airfares to London yet on the traditional airlines were unexpectedly approved today by President Carter. He overruled the Civil Aeronautics Board and told U.S. airlines they could begin immediately with a $256 guaranteed seat round-trip New York-London fare. That's just $20 more than the standby, no reservation service that the British Laker Airways began today. Its first plane left London with about 1/5 the seats empty, despite the fact that the first ticket buyers had lined up 2 days in advance. Although the government has banned sleepwear treated with the flame retardant tris, an environmental group charged today that another hazardous chemical is being used in its place. The substitute is Fyrol FR2, which some tests have shown can cause cell mutations. Stauffer Chemical Company, which makes Fyrol, said it has stopped selling the chemical, but it doesn't know whether some sleepwear with it is still on the shelves. 15-year-old Ronnie Zamora went on trial in Miami today, charged with murdering an elderly woman during a burglary. The case is an unusual one, not only because television cameras have been allowed in the courtroom, but especially because of the teenager's defense to the charges. David Dick has the story.
The victim was 83-year-old Eleanor Haggart. She was shot to death in June of this year during the robbery of her Miami Beach home. But what might have been just another homicide case has attracted worldwide interest. The defendants are 15-year-old Ronnie Zamora and 15-year-old Daryl Agrella. They will be tried separately for murder. First, Ronnie Zamora. His attorney will attempt to prove that Ronnie is innocent by reason of insanity, that at the time of the crime with which he is charged, he was mentally afflicted by television violence, that at the time of the murder he was acting under the influence of what his attorney describes as involuntary subliminal television intoxication. Kojak was Ronnie Zamora's favorite program, according to the attorney for the defense. Actor Telly Savalas has been ordered to give a deposition to the court. The judge will decide later whether to require Savalas to appear at the trial. The basic question, to what extent did television affect the behavior of Ronnie Zamora? The prosecution argues that, quote, a TV set causing intoxication is an absurdity. In Florida, television cameras are permitted in courtrooms, and this trial has attracted local, national, and international coverage. Because of the defendants' ages and the fact that they could be given death sentences, Judge Paul Baker is warning witnesses and prospective jurors not to watch rebroadcasts of the trial and has ordered the attorneys not to talk to the news media. David Dick, CBS News, Miami.
The Transportation Department believes regular auto seat belts don't provide enough protection. It wants all cars eventually to have either airbags or a shoulder harness that locks automatically when a person enters the vehicle. Well, certain Volkswagen Rabbits already have such an automatic harness, and the Transportation Department said today that the accident death rate in those cars is only 1/3 the rate in cars with belts that must be locked manually. The world's coffee-producing nations gathered for their regular meeting in London today, excuse me, and it develops that there's a sharp split over what should be done about prices. It seems that since they let prices soar, world coffee consumption has dropped drastically. Colombia, the world's second-largest producer, says they must put a ceiling on prices to try to bring consumers back. But Brazil, the #1 producer, is holding out for even higher prices. The Dow Jones Industrial Average picked up about 2.5 points today. Volume on the New York Stock Exchange, 18,200,000 shares. The average price per share gained 8 cents on the New York Exchange. It was unchanged on the American. Lester Maddox, the former governor of Georgia, is reported in guarded condition tonight after suffering a heart attack. Maddox is 61. The United Nations General Assembly opened debate today before representatives from 149 countries. The newest member, Vietnam. Eric Severide comments.
The UN General Assembly has reconvened in New York, including representatives of the regime that now runs a unified Vietnam.
They won their war. They have demonstrated full control of that country. The principle of universality must govern UN membership, not like-mindedness, so they are entitled to their seat. Americans must put up with that. What they may properly react to is the transaction that occurred yesterday in a New York theater. Several thousand other Americans joyfully welcomed the Hanoi delegation, one of whom promptly denounced what he called U.S. imperialism and demanded money payment from this country. One newspaper describes the gathering as the anti-war movement coming together again. It was rather that part of the anti-war movement which was not anti-war at all. It was anti the American role in the war and pro-Hanoi. This group never had the slightest objection to the murderous civil war in Vietnam, which was started by the Hanoi communists who invaded the South, where the war was entirely fought, save for the American bombing of the North. There was a great difference between those Americans who wanted the United States out of the war because they thought it was none of our business, unwinnable, morally and politically destructive of our own principles and our own society, between them and the Americans who wanted Hanoi to win. It was the latter, for the most part, who met in the theater and had the effrontery to welcome the Hanoi officials in the name of the American people. There is nothing most Americans want to forget more than Vietnam, but this occurrence obliges us to do a little remembering, to remember the thousands of North Vietnamese farmers cold-bloodedly liquidated by the Hanoi communists in the name of their class warfare doctrine. A million or so ordinary people of the North driven into exile in the South, men, women, and children on foot, tens of thousands of Catholics among them. The thousands of village leaders in the South executed by Viet Cong assassination squads. And to remember that at no time was there evidence that the majority of southern Vietnamese desired communist rule, and much evidence that a majority feared and loathed the prospect. They were not a downtrodden, starving people, however inefficient and often corrupt their officialdom, which never imposed massive regimentation upon them. Most of those in the New York theater were not celebrating peace. They were celebrating the triumph of communist totalitarianism, which is what they had always been working for in the guise of a peace movement.
Rhodesian blacks outnumber the country's whites 24-1, and the ratio is fast increasing. According to figures released today, more than 1,600 whites left Rhodesia last month. Only 598 arrived. At that rate, there would be no whites left in Rhodesia by the year 2006.
Feels sensational. Rose milk skincare cream. Rose milk isn't just for hands, you know. Feels absolutely sensational on legs, arms, everywhere. I practically bathe in it. Rose milk never leaves my skin feeling greasy or sticky. Just soft and smooth like rose petals.
Try new rose milk unscented or regular rose milk. All over. Rose milk skincare cream. You can really feel the difference.
Sensational.
This woman, my wife, mother of my children, career woman, she's amazing. You know, in an average day, she does more than lots of people do in a week.
Oh, honey, we both do a lot. But busy as I am, I find the time to do the right things to take care of myself.
Like taking Geritol every day.
Geritol, to be sure you get enough iron and some very important vitamins. Take a look at what Geritol can do for you.
Isn't she something?
Oh, come on, enough already.
Geritol every day.
It's been more than 8 years since British troops were dispatched to Northern Ireland to quell the violence between Protestants and Catholics. Since then, hundreds of persons have been killed, countless others have been arrested. Mike Lee gives us a rare look inside the prison where many of those arrested are held.
The prisoners march in homemade uniforms, with homemade flags, and answer only to their commanding inmate officers inside the barbed wire compound. It's not a POW camp in the 1940s, but a British prison in Northern Ireland in 1977. The Long Kesh prison, also known as the Maze, just outside Belfast, where some 700 inmates, half Catholic, half Protestant, and all convicted of acts of terrorism, enjoy, in the very real sense of the term, the status of political prisoners. This film, said to have been taken this past summer inside the Maze prison with a smuggled camera, shows convicted Protestant terrorists. But life for Catholic inmates of the provisional IRA is reported to be much the same. It all began with a prisoners' hunger strike in 1972, with IRA inmates claiming not to be common criminals or murderers, but prisoners of war, the war against British rule, and demanding and getting special category status. This was also granted to Protestant terrorist inmates in order to keep peace inside the prison. Special category prisoners don't have to work, can wear their own clothes or paramilitary uniforms, can receive regular parcels of food and clothing from the outside, cannot be addressed directly by prison guards, except through the inmate chain of command, and are allowed to conduct classes of their own choosing. Such classes are said to include instruction in the care and use of rifles. This reported IRA photograph claims to show an inmate teacher holding a wooden model made inside the prison. The technique of sniping is another reported learning process, as well as the ins and outs of wiring and planting terrorist bombs. Desmond Irvine is a spokesman for the prison guards.
Probably their training takes place during the hours of darkness when they're locked in a hut, rather than during the hours of daylight.
Is there anything you can do to stop it?
No.
John White was recently a Protestant military commander inside the Mays prison.
There's a war situation on. It's been going on this last 7 or 8 years. Both sides have committed acts of terrorism, and it is a war-like situation. Therefore, if we are caught on an operation, we feel that we are prisoners of war, which we are.
Mrs. Bernie McMullen has 2 sons in prison, one for murdering a British soldier, the other for the attempted murder of a policeman.
They never broke and entered. They never murdered anyone.
Except soldiers?
Except soldiers and policemen, yes. They're at war with them people. They're out fighting for their country, not fighting for their own gains. No, none of my sons ever fought for their own gains. They fought for the love of their country. And I admire them. I'm proud of them. I really am proud of them.
Since March of 1976, jailed terrorists are no longer treated as privileged prisoners. But those who do enjoy such freedoms in captivity will be allowed to continue them. That's because officials fear a prison-wide bloodbath if inmates are denied their political status.
So the guards continue to look on helplessly. The British government turns an embarrassed head, and much of Northern Ireland waits in fear for the day the special categories return to the streets. Mike Lee, CBS News, at the Mays prison near Belfast.
In spite of President Carter's appeal for continued natural gas price controls, a Senate test vote late this afternoon showed strong opposition to doing so. It was 53 to 39. And that's the way it is, Monday, September 26, 1977. This is Walter Cronkite, CBS News. Good night.
This signal is searching for a General Electric VIR color TV. The signal's VIR. It lets broadcasters automatically control the color of your TV picture on many programs. Watch this General Electric VIR set use this signal and automatically adjust all of the color. Flesh tones, background colors, the entire color picture. VIR broadcast controlled color. This is GE Performance Television.
All alone or in a crowd, when you're feeling very proud, for a fancy angel cake or a devil's luncheon break, on a diet or in training for your weekend entertaining, the incredible edible egg.
Eggs provide highest quality protein nourishment at an amazingly low cost per serving. And you can serve eggs in so many economical ways. So don't run out.
The incredible edible egg.
This has been the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite. Don't anybody leave the room until Betty White's diamond necklace shows up. Apparent larceny leads to laughter on The Betty White Show. Tonight at 9, 8 Central and Mountain Time, here on CBS.
Stay tuned for Eyewitness News, next on Channel 5, WTVF, Nashville.
We were born in America's hometowns, picking up the mail. We enjoyed working with our neighbors, and they helped us grow.